you need to have, again, governance discussions. You need to have a risk register of what you believe your key AI risks are. And then you need to have a tolerance for that so you can help the folks that actually have their hands on the levers here configure these tools appropriately, right? So for example, if you've got a high risk tolerance because you're not a particularly regulated entity and you can use AI pretty much with abandon, like some companies have done, and the ROI for it is extremely high, like you're trying to grow, you establish that, but you make it a part of a documented conversation, and you make it a reasonable choice as you're going with your eyes open. And so then you let these tools loose in your company.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of The Future of Data Security. Today, I'm speaking with Dan Maynard. Dan is the VP Privacy and Data Risk Management and the Chief Privacy Officer at Early Warning. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great. You guys do a really good job at Early Warning. Maybe for the benefit of our audience, can you talk a little bit about your responsibilities and what led you to join the company?
Right. So as a Chief Privacy Officer, I lead the privacy program, which is the end-to-end soup to nuts monitoring of all the use of the personal information, of which we obviously have a lot under our care. I also lead data risk management, which is the second line of defense data governance function for Early Warning, working with our first line of defense folks in the IT and our chief data office. I also have responsibility for model risk management. We develop fraud models and to detect and stop fraud on networks like Zelle and for our financial institution customers. And then we also have records management, a number of other policies for like our AI acceptable use policy in those forms. I joined Early Warnings because it's honestly a unique entity. Its ownership structure is very unique. It's got interesting data. I always look for big brands that are recognizable, that have data and data protection responsibilities and brand responsibilities that you can't find anywhere else. And Early Warning checks all those boxes. My background was also uniquely tailored to this, having come from the Federal Reserve, which also has a unique ownership structure and brand. And so I saw the posting 5 years ago. I'm like, this is me. I can do this. I hit it off, and it's honestly the best company I've ever worked for. The culture was amazing, and that's the culture that built Zelle, and it has a very, very high level of awareness among the employees and openness to security and privacy issues, which is something you can't buy.
I saw that you studied law. Maybe we could say you're a reformed lawyer.
Right.
How did you go from that to the world of privacy and data risk management?
Yeah, I like to say like a fake lawyer. I'm not like an official lawyer. I don't represent my company from a legal perspective. I came out of law school. I entered law school. I had worked for Bear Stearns on the actually subprime trading area. That blew up, and I went to law school as a consequence. But I was still really I saw it as like an alternative to an MBA. I always just thought like this naive, like the early 20s person, I'll just go learn the rules. I think it'd be cool to have a law degree and a law license. Why not? It's wildly expensive, huge opportunity costs. But so it worked out. But I came out of law school, and it was probably the worst year in the history of the United States to graduate as an attorney. But I was still really interested in data. So I lived in Minneapolis at the time. Target Corp is like the city employer there. Everybody works there. Applied for a job in the data insights area in Target Financial Services. Got to understand the data environment, use of personal information, the brand, everything. It's a great company to start a career at, honestly, and there's amazing smart people there. But there was the Target privacy incident with the pregnancy scoring and all that. The New York Times and the Charles Duhigg book. They wanted to start a privacy team. I had a mentor at the time who used to work on an information protection team there, connected me with the folks who were building that team, interviewed, and that's how I got into privacy. And that's like, 14, 15 years ago. And then I've just been doing it ever since.
And right now in your current role at Early Warning, you do a lot of work internally. Do you work with clients as well extensively?
We do have some interaction with our customers, the financial institutions, that the 2,000 or so that use Zelle, that use our fraud and decision intelligence products, and also pays. It's mostly internal. It's internal consulting, ensuring that assessments are done, controls are applied, maturity is pursued, things like that.
And what would you say are the most important challenges right now that are facing the business that you're seeing?
I don't want to speak too much for my company. I'd really say this is probably my personal opinions. I'll say that,
Right.
because it's impossible to speak for something so complex. I wouldn't even try to begin to do that. But I would say, like, for financial services in general, I think data quality is probably a huge thing. Like, everything starts with the quality of your data. If you can't have good quality data, you might as well not do the other things. And that's on both sides of the equation. Is we have to maintain it. Our financial institutions have to maintain it. We have to all make sure and that ties back to privacy, in that we owe our data subjects, all financial institutions, all entities that process personal information, owe a duty to data subjects to handle and have high quality data and not mess with their lives in material ways. There's that. I think with AI, ethics and trust is a huge thing. I don't think we as a society have had enough conversations about what that means to have your data processed by AI, or like the provenance of the data that was used to build these models. That's a huge challenge, very difficult to solve, and with very little time to explain it. Yeah, the ethics crosses across all data boundaries, privacy, security, and it's even more important today, I'd say. So it's like, if I had to pick two things, that's probably it.
Yeah, and it's fair to say that most consumers just scroll through all the privacy statements and all the warnings, and nobody really knows what's happening.
Right. And I mean, that's our fault. I mean, we're all guilty of that, because you have to strike a balance between readability and protecting your entity, right?
Yeah.
It's impossible. That's an impossible thing to crack unless you can invent some kind of pill that you take that immediately makes you understand in your core what processing is happening. You're going to have to read something that's very dry and boring.
We spoke earlier, and you said you were passionate about AI fraud and corporate and personal types of frauds. Can you speak to some emerging challenges or stories you've seen in that space?
So emerging, I would say it's just individual education is such a huge aspect of this, because we have the most sophisticated technology in the world. We have sophisticated models. There's law enforcement out there, but people still have to have free will. And as long as you have free will, you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to be in a stressful situation where a fraudster is asking you to do something. And there's also the aspect is the stronger our fraud protections can be, there's the paradoxical negative privacy impacts that come along with collecting and processing more personal information, even if it is for the noble goal of preventing fraud and theft. That's very difficult. And AI just makes it even more realistic. Instead of actually having to type malicious scripts to phish people, you can just have autonomous agents, semi-autonomous agents doing it for you, which makes the scale of this. It's just constant noise coming at us all the time. It's just going to be even worse, perhaps.
Everyone talks about it. Have you seen some real life examples, without naming anyone? Are you actually seeing these agents or new generation systems coming online from a fraud perspective?
I don't personally. I can connect you with some people who could give you some very interesting takes on that. I am not knowledgeable enough in that area to have any direct experience of that. Probably the ones that everyone has heard are the ones where it's like voice emulators, right? Pretending to be someone, and that can be very convincing, especially if they have a lot of personal information that they can feed into the model. Those are probably ones that we'd be personally vulnerable to. But yeah, I don't think you need AI to perpetrate large scale fraud. The good old fashioned phishing tools with like the emails with the spelling errors still are very cost effective and effective. AI might just be overkill for that.
Indeed. Switching gear a little bit, I'm really curious about your experience with GenAI and some of the new approaches to privacy and data risk management. Are there any trends, tools, methodologies that you could share with us? This could be internal to your work or even externally what you've seen. I can say from our perspective in software development, there's all kinds of major changes. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
I think one of the more interesting things that I can probably speak to more coherently is the risk assessment of it, how you do a risk assessment of these tools.
Okay.
I think there's a couple of big buckets of risk. There are the risks that you can control against. You can probably remediate or insure against. These are the things that are like the hard things, right? Where you say, if we're going to whitelist a model or a wrapper for a model, it needs to check these 25 boxes, right? It needs to have like multi-factor authentication. It needs to be logging in. It's like kind of the same old things like we encountered with like the cloud back in the day when everybody panicked about data that shouldn't be in the cloud. That's in the cloud. But yeah, like representations from an entity, working with established entities that can indemnify you against any problems. Companies like the big companies like Microsoft. In fact, I think they actually do that, right? They indemnify you for anything. Ensure that your intellectual property is yours. You don't lose any property rights in your data. All of those things, I think you can get to a lower level of residual risk. I think the stuff that you can't, the known unknowns of this is the provenance of the model risk, which you cannot get to. I don't think you can get to an acceptable level where you say you've remediated to a low level. You just have to accept it because you believe the productivity gains are so strong. And that's things like the fact that you might use a model to create some valuable IP, like let's say a fraud model, or even just the software and the operating system for a vehicle or something like that. There's a possibility that somebody will come along and enjoin you from using that IP, or say they own it because their property was used to create your property and a court agrees with them. I think some of those things are still unresolved. And that's a huge risk that companies just are either blindly accepting, which I don't recommend, but I think there should be a governance process that quantifies those risks, or at least elucidates them in succinct statements and presents them to the executive leadership, so that the company can go in and say, this wasn't for a lack of having our eyes open, and we made a reasonable, calculated decision to do this.
That's really interesting. Model provenance. There's a whole supply chain problem emerging with that also, because a lot of companies now that had legacy software are sprinkling or adding layers of generative AI. And again, where's that coming from? And is it like a third party to an end party, because they could be using another provider? I think that's making the whole third party risk landscape much more difficult to control. I heard someone say the other day, it's not the third party anymore, it's the end party. Who else is in the supply chain?
It's vendors all the way down. And you can't, and they multiply and populate at insane pace.
Yeah, you're seeing that too then.
Yeah, it's like whack-a-mole. I mean, you have to use basically your detection tools to see what people are trying to access and what people are trying to use and what your legacy software programs are trying to connect to, and you have to block. We just block that stuff.
What would be your main advice for leaders, people thinking about addressing this risk? What have you seen is most effective?
First, you have to have governance for the decision making for this, so you can document that you're making reasonable, risk-based, informed decisions. And then you have to, that governance can't sit on an island somewhere. It has to have appropriate cross-functional decision making and participation, and it has to have executive buy-in and sponsorship, so that that risk-based guidance is making it to your executives so that they can make informed decisions about this stuff. That you need to have the technology to monitor for the use of this stuff. So we trust our employees or any employees at a company, but a lot of this it's accidental, because I think a lot of us believe, if I can access it at work, it's allowed, right? And that might just be because we can't keep up with the number of tools that are proliferating. And then training and awareness, always have to make a plug for that. Like, this is something that it's not just a group of employees have to be trained on. I think all employees have to have some level of understanding of how these tools work. It's not just magic, and you have to follow the rules for them. It's not a magic wand that gets to escape all of your required processes like privacy impact assessments and SDLC and security architecture review, all those kinds of things.
Everyone's always looking for the magic wand, but it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Some of the latest technologies, assistive AI technologies like Microsoft Copilot and others are gaining popularity. A lot of these tools are going to be accessing files using users' permission. You're not necessarily creating and delivering a new account, a new set of permissions for these systems. And it seems like it's putting old risks to the forefront. And what I mean by that is previously an employee wouldn't spend all his time looking around, perusing around for what files can I access, but these systems certainly will. Do you have any thoughts on that and how to tackle this access risk, which isn't new, but is now being exacerbated by machines accessing data in a new and unusual way?
That's a really good question. I think I know what you're saying. I had a conversation about this in a different context with somebody recently that was kind of enlightening. I think what you're saying is we have to go from authenticating and identifying people like humans to authenticating bots, which don't have human-like behaviors. Is that like what you're saying? And so they're trying to
Potentially, but
access
what I'm
data.
saying is, say that I'm working in an organization, I may have all kinds of access to shared drives and different repositories,
Mhm.
but unless I'm working on something, I'm not spending all day to peruse these folders to see, hey, I wonder what's in here, what
Mhm.
sensitive information I could access. But if I have a system that I'm using that can access all the same folders that I do, what's happening then and what files does this system have access to? And one of the examples that came out is somebody was chatting with an AI chatbot and said, "Hey, can you tell me what Dan's salary is?" And
Huh.
it got it from a long lost HR file somewhere that had that
Whoa.
information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking about that new phenomenon of machines accessing files in an unchecked, I would
Right.
say, new and unusual way,
Because it's just trying to be helpful. It's programmed to seek and destroy and get that.
right?
And it has permission. So you have
Exactly.
to assume. Yeah, that is an old risk, right? I think that's just your old records and content management strategy. If you have a maturity roadmap for your entire data governance and data management program, you'll have a slot for content management. And like corporate data like that, unstructured, like salary files in areas like HR, usually is last on the roadmap. They keep getting pushed out, right? Because the crown jewel data that's used to build the products is, and then this kind of ancillary corporate side data is, so you have to have you have to be diligent and have a strategy for how you, like, it's really boring, right? Like, how do you set up email? How does your team's SharePoint backend establish repositories for all your files? How do you institute retention periods by default for that stuff? And then I think AI can also be helpful in doing data discovery. So if you have like DLP tools that are like modern, you can sweep through your environments to find all of that stuff. The same way the agent would do it autonomously, you can use it to find on a large scale, find all these documents, and then maybe unilaterally delete them if that's your risk tolerance. You just don't even want to see them out there.
Yeah, that's an interesting plot twist because AI brings a whole range of new problems. But I keep hearing people saying at the same time, AI will be the solution to these new problems.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, it has to. Let's hope so.
Any thoughts on shadow AI? I think a lot of organizations took a strategic pause with the availability of some systems, especially OpenAI style chatbots and things like that. But there's always a risk that employees have access to that stuff on their personal devices. It's undeniable. It gives a huge advantage. What do you do when faced with that situation?
They're going to use it anyway, on their personal devices. But it really just comes down to what you need to have, again, governance discussions. You need to have a risk register of what you believe your key AI risks are. And then you need to have a tolerance for that so you can help the folks that actually have their hands on the levers here configure these tools appropriately, right? So for example, if you've got a high risk tolerance because you're not a particularly regulated entity and you can use AI pretty much with abandon, like some companies have done, and the ROI for it is extremely high, like you're trying to grow, you establish that, but you make it a part of a documented conversation, and you make it a reasonable choice as you're going with your eyes open. And so then you let these tools loose in your company. But let's say you're like an airline or a highly regulated entity or a bank or a financial institution that doesn't necessarily have to move at the bleeding edge. You probably want to set your risk tolerance a little bit lower and block a lot of this stuff by default. So maybe you block any AI domain. You can't access. You just put a little bit more of a hurdle between your employees and these tools. Again, it's an old risk, right? It's like anything. Like, as a privacy officer, I don't want. You're not allowed to put, paste personal information into Google or like a Google spreadsheet, right? It's the same as, and you're not allowed to paste it into an AI tool. It's just AI. It's just a privacy incident or event happening with AI rather than with email or something else, right? So you have education for users. to help them understand how to make good choices. But then you have that technical backstop that blocks it and detects it. So, for example, you can see what it's the AI content's pretty clear when it comes into your systems and when it leaves your systems. So even if people are importing AI prompts and their results into their, like, forwarding it to themselves,
Yeah.
you can see that, right? And then so you've got the breadcrumbs to maybe go coach folks and say, hey, how did you create that? Because again, it comes back to intellectual property and then information protection. And so you do use some of the same tactics that you would in any other case, I think.
Yeah,
It's not,
it's very interesting, and we saw a couple examples already. Like some law firms were using AI, and they had fictitious rulings and wrong information. Like it gets really tricky quickly if you're rendering a service or doing something, and you've got thousands of employees potentially emailing themselves pieces of the puzzle.
there's some startups out there that are doing the legal thing. I think it's smart.
Yeah.
You're going to use AI for law, but let's have a platform that's made by lawyers, perhaps, that's specifically tailored to protecting
Indeed.
the interest that lawyers would be. Also, if I'm a client and I'm getting billed pre-AI prices and hours for post-AI stuff, I might want a discount. But that's just the finance.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I don't know to what degree. I ask myself that question too. Like, I get some lawyer bills and I'm like, how much of this was generated automatically? Am I getting scammed here? What's going on?
I think it's a matter, because you could make the analogy, well, accountants have been using spreadsheets now and they still got to charge the same hourly rate. But a spreadsheet, I think, it's just an generative AI tool is exponentially more powerful and it saves you exponentially more time.
Yeah.
But does it provide you the exponentially same level of return or quality? I don't know.
I've spoken to some lawyers and they said they don't use it. It's banned across the firm, but I'm honestly skeptical. I have a hard time believing that, given some of the models out there that are so good, so quick, and you could save so much time. I have a hard time actually believing that.
Yeah, I would be concerned with privilege issues too. I don't know if this has ever been brought up in court or whatever, but like, if you're pasting client privileged, information, are you violating your duty of confidentiality by doing that? That's another concern I would worry about.
Recently, we had sort of a Washington effect, I think, in the space where the US is pushing for AI innovation. There's a deregulation sentiment around AI, and in Europe, it's a bit different. Do you have any thoughts or predictions on that and what's going to happen?
Ooh. In terms of, are we going to have AI legislation?
Exactly, because a lot of jurisdictions are left a bit of a vacuum with the way things are going to be to answer all of these seminal questions we've been talking about.
I mean, personally, I think we absolutely do need some kind of federal rule, if only to set a baseline, because you see, like, Colorado, their recent law is a little bit problematic. It scoops in some stuff that is traditionally considered AI, but has been around for decades. Like machine learning, I think, is technically within the scope of that law, which causes some issues. And there isn't carve outs for functions like model development for fraud purposes that are regulated heavily and quite well by existing federal entities. And so I think from a standpoint of, like, it's same thing with the data breach laws and the privacy legislation, it would be very, very helpful to companies in terms of, like, streamlining and saving money and efficiencies on compliance to have a national standard that sets the bar, that we know if we do this one thing, we're good. We don't have to keep a matrix of 54 different laws. Yeah, I think you're right. It's probably, if there is a law, it's probably business friendly and exists to not slow the momentum of innovation rather than consumer protection angle or sentiment like it may have been in the past decade.
Something's going to happen.
Yeah. Or there's a major incident, right? There's a major incident that happens, swings public opinion, and then that gets leveraged to do something.
Talking about yourself, like if you were to give advice to a younger Dan or even someone that's new coming into the space, what would be some of the top lessons learned that you want to share over the years?
Try to work for, like I said, find large recognizable brands with strong corporate cultures of development. Work for people who have done this. I was really fortunate to have worked with and for very experienced people that taught me a lot. So you're going to learn by through example. Like read everything. Read. When I first started doing this, I read every single like law journal on privacy risk, the idea of privacy harms. Go work in data, like cross lines, right? So work on the first line of defense, like work in the actual areas that do data analytics and use these tools, and then go work on the other side, right? Cross pollinate, find ways to, because that builds your credibility with stakeholders, right? Like you can't do a ton of it and you're never going to be like a super expert on both sides, but you'll at least understand the language, and yeah, educate yourself. And then just have like a super open mind and be like, have a positive strengths-based approach to things. It can be a struggling field, and you the more you learn, the less you know, but just like exhibit a positive attitude about this stuff, and look on the bright side of it. It's not corporate privacy and data is not like about being an activist, honestly. It's about solving problems for your company and getting the best outcome for consumers, your products, your business owners, and striking that balance. So just a win all around.
Very well said. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have to allocate for today. But before we wrap, if people want to follow up on what you're doing, are you on LinkedIn, Twitter? Where can people find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn. You can contact me there, Daniel Maynard. I won't divulge my other social handles. I'm just a lurker. Yeah, but feel free to reach out. I love making connections all over the place. It's like maybe that's another piece of advice. Get out there and connect with as many people as possible. And you'll be surprised how many people want to have a wild ranging conversation about any topic. And I'm very happy to do that.
It's true. And I'm like you. I lurk around. I don't post that much on the platforms.
You want to create that paper trail. The internet is forever.
Yeah, indeed. Well, this has been a really fun conversation. Thank you again for participating, and let's stay in touch.
Likewise. Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.